Greetings all. As I wish you well for your individual and corporate endeavours during Lent, which should be a time of growth in holiness and insight and understanding, I thought I would just say, as we commend the efforts of this season, something that's really terribly obvious but is worth reiterating nevertheless. I think people have a kind of dim view of Lent traditionally because they sort of think it's all about sin and the nature of sin and the appalling sinfulness of the human condition. And this gives them a rather bleak and pessimistic view of what Lent is about. Lent is indeed about contemplating our shortcomings and our sins and our temptations and trying to deal with them, but we would understand it much more creatively if we had, I think, a more, if it's possible to say this, wholesome view of sin itself. Sin in the biblical context, in the original Greek indeed of the New Testament, is not so much about willful wrongdoing, going out and committing crimes, committing appalling acts against other people. Although, of course, such sin does occur and it blights humanity and it needs to be addressed, sometimes by punitive sanctions. But for most of us, most of the time, sin is not so much willful doing of dreadful things, but rather careless falling short of the good which we have the capacity to do if we put our mind to it. Sin is about seeking God's grace to avoid our shortcomings, our falling short, as opposed a lot of the time to dealing with our willful wrongdoing. If you look at the New Testament and some of the original Greek words etymologically, the word that's translated sin in English is drawn in Greek from the language of the old world of archery, of people shooting at targets. And the word used in that context originally for missing the target, not hitting the bullseye, falling short, is the same word as eventually in our vocabulary found its way into sin. And if you take that view of sin, that it's a falling short of what we might be capable of if we were truly our best selves, then you have a much more wholesome view of it, and our shortcomings can be dealt with in a much more grace-filled way. So during Lent, indeed, we have to contemplate where we are willfully wicked, and it does happen. But even more than that, we have to contemplate how we fall short of the targets ourselves and God set for ourselves. Could we be more generous as we think of victims of earthquakes, as we think of refugees and the need for hospitality? Yes, we could. Could we be more kind when we think of small acts that transform others' lives, of taking time to be thoughtful? Yes, we could. Could we be a little bit more holy and God-focused by being a bit more disciplined about our prayer and worship and participation in the sacraments during Lent to prepare for Easter? Yes, we could. Could we do just a little bit more to make our contribution to making the world a better and more kindly place? Yes, we could. So, at the end of the day during Lent, take time in a positive way to contemplate your shortcomings, how you don't achieve targets you should set for yourselves, how you and I could be a bit nearer to the bullseye, which by hitting it makes us, as it were, truly human. And when you think about it, Jesus' own temptations in the wilderness to some extent are about falling short and realizing if he succumbed to them, he would not hit the targets that God had set for himself in his incarnation and in his ministry. So treat Lent as a positive, grace-filled time, a time not to wallow in a misleading understanding of sin, but rather a time to creatively contemplate how we fall short, to think of the ancient world of archery and to try a bit harder by Easter to hit that bullseye which makes us truly human, a bit more in the image of God, and turns us into our best selves, which is, after all, what Lent is ultimately about. So, dare I say, enjoy it. It is what has been described through the offering and possibilities it presents to us. It is something of a sweet feast.